Wyoming Territory, 1873. The slap of a hand echoed louder than the thunderheads rolling in from the west. "She shamed the whole train," someone shouted. Silas Waverly stumbled as the wagon lurched forward, boots scraping dirt as she hit the ground. Her wedding dress tore on a thorn bush, lace snagging like a caught lie. Dust clouded her eyes, but she did not cry. She stood, blood on her palm from the fall, and watched the wagon train roll on without her. No one looked back, not even her own father. The wind cut through the trees behind her, whispering like it knew her secret. She turned and walked into the woods. Victor Callahan had been tracking elk for 2 days when he heard something moving through the underbrush that was too clumsy to be game. He crouched low, hand resting on the rifle slung across his chest, moving slow until he spotted her barefoot, limping, dress muddied and torn halfway up her thigh. She leaned against a pine, trying to catch her breath, chest rising fast. Her face was streaked with dust, but there was steel in her eyes. "Madam?" Victor stepped closer, boots crunching pine needles. "You lost." She flinched, then squared her shoulders. "No," he nodded once. "All right. You just choosing to bleed in the middle of nowhere then." She looked down at the cut on her leg and the torn skin on her hands like she had not noticed. "It's not bad." Victor studied her. She was young, maybe 23, but not fragile. Not really. She looked like someone who had been holding herself together for too long and had just now run out of rope. He took off his hat and stepped forward slowly. "Name's Victor Callahan. Got a cabin a few miles west. You're welcome to rest there if you want." Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because it's going to rain," he said, glancing at the sky, "and you do not look like you have a plan." She hesitated. Then she nodded. The storm hit just as they reached his cabin. He kept the fire going while she sat at the edge of the hearth, staring into it like it had answers. He handed her a clean rag and a tin cup of water. She took them without a word. "You got a name?" he asked, settling across from her. She stared at the flames. "Silas." "Silas," he repeated. "That's unusual for a woman. My father wanted a boy." Victor did not ask anything else. He just leaned back in the chair and let the silence stretch. Later, as the wind howled outside and the fire spit sparks, she spoke again. "I was supposed to marry a man in the train," she said, voice thin. "He found out I wasn't untouched. Told everyone I was a liar. My father threw me out." Victor's jaw tightened. "That man touch you without marrying you?" "No," she said quickly. "It was before him. Years ago. Someone. My father owed money. He let him take me." Victor looked at the fire, fists clenched. "You were a child?" "I was 15. He stood suddenly, walked to the door, opened it, then shut it again like he needed to release something into the cold. When he came back, he sat beside her. "You are not the one who should feel ashamed." Silas looked at him. Really looked. No pity in his eyes. Just something steady. Honest. She blinked hard. "They threw me out like I was nothing." "You were not nothing." By morning the storm had passed. Her dress hung by the fire, drying in the warmth. Victor had given her one of his shirts to wear, too big, sleeves rolled up, but clean. She ate slowly, chewing jerky and cornbread like it was a feast. Victor brought her a leather-bound book and sat it in her lap. "Something to read. You are welcome to stay until you figure where you are headed." She looked at him. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." She swallowed. "What if someone from the train comes looking? They will not get past me." Silas's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. "Thank you." He paused, then ran a hand down his face. "You should know. I do not expect anything from you. Not now, not ever." She nodded. "I know." But she looked at him longer this time. There was a kindness in him she'd never seen in a man before. Not once. The days passed slow and quiet. She helped him with chores, gathering wood, boiling coffee, brushing down the mule. She liked the way he moved, efficient, grounded, like a man who had built this life with his own hands. He liked the way she laughed when the mule sneezed hay all over her. One evening while they shelled beans at the kitchen table, she asked, "Why are you out here alone?" Victor shrugged. "Spent 10 years in the army. Saw enough killing to last me. Came out west looking for quiet. You ever think about going back east? No, he said simply. Silas nodded. Me neither. A week later, she woke to find him gone. A note left on the table back by sundown. Stay inside. She spent the day pacing. When he returned, he carried a saddlebag and a grim look. Someone from the train came to town, he said. Asking who took in a girl in a wedding dress. Her heart dropped. My father. No. The man you were supposed to marry. She backed into the wall. He wants to drag me back. He will not, Victor said, setting the bag down. I told him you were gone. Said I had not seen no girl. But he will come back. Might bring others. She felt the panic rising, chest clenching. Victor stepped close and put his hand gently on her arm. You are safe here. You hear me? She nodded, but her lips trembled. Silas, he said, voice low, I will not let anyone take you. Something in her chest cracked open. She reached for his hand, held it tight. That night, as the wind settled and the fire burned low, she stood behind him and rested her chin on his shoulder. I do not want to leave, she whispered. Victor turned slowly. Then stay. I have nothing to offer you. You have everything. He brushed her hair back, lips just inches from hers. I do not care what came before, he said. I care about what comes next. Her eyes brimmed. What if I fall in love with you? His voice dropped. Then I will be the luckiest man alive. She kissed him gentle, slow, and his arms wrapped around her like they were made to hold her. And in that cabin, in the heart of the wild Wyoming woods, something broken began to mend. Together. Victor had a habit of waking before the sun. That morning, he stepped out into the pale hush before dawn, the ground still holding the night's chill. He hauled water from the creek with practiced ease, boots damp from the dewy grass. When he returned, Silas was seated on the porch steps, arms wrapped around her knees, face turned east. She hadn't heard him come back. You sleep at all? He asked, setting the bucket down beside the door. A little, she said. It's quiet out here. But not empty. He sat beside her, letting the quiet settle again. A hawk circled above the trees, wings catching the first slant of light. I used to think quiet meant being alone, she said after a while. But this feels different. Victor rubbed his palms together, calluses scraping. Out here, quiet gives a man or woman room to think. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it ain't. Silas pulled her braid over her shoulder and studied the end. I keep waiting for the fear to come back. That kind that crawls behind your ribs and stays there. But it hasn't. Victor didn't answer right away. That's because it knows it's not welcome anymore. She gave a small nod, as if she was still working out whether she believed that. Later that morning, Victor showed her how to split kindling. She held the hatchet too tightly at first, wrists stiff. You're fighting it, he said, watching her angle the blade. Let the weight do the work. She tried again. The wood cracked clean under her second swing. Better, he said. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand. I was never allowed to touch tools before. My stepmother said it wasn't ladylike. He handed her another log. Seems to me usefulness is more important than appearances. She lined the blade again. My stepmother didn't think much of usefulness either. Victor didn't press. He just held another log steady for her. The sound of wood splitting filled the air between them, steady and sure. By midday, Silas had stacked a neat pile against the cabin wall. Victor handed her a tin of cool water and leaned against the porch rail. You learn quick, he said. Only when I want to. He raised an eyebrow. So you don't want to learn when someone tells you to? She smiled faintly. Depends who's doing the telling. The sky had turned high and blue by the time they headed out to check the trap lines. Victor had set them near a rocky bend in the creek where rabbits liked to dart between bushes. Silas stepped carefully over the stones, eyes scanning the underbrush. Used to help my brother check snares, she said, before he left for Texas. He was the only one who ever taught me anything. They found 2 rabbits and reset the traps. Victor showed her how to field dress them with a sharp flick of the knife and a steady hand. Silas didn't flinch. You've done this before, he noted. Once, she said. He showed me. Said I should know how to feed myself if no one else was around. Victor nodded and wrapped the cleaned rabbits in a cloth. Sounds like he had sense. He did, she said. He just didn't have luck. They walked back in silence. Birds chattered in the trees as the breeze picked up, cool against their faces. When they reached the cabin, Silas paused at the threshold. "You ever think about someone and wonder if they'd recognize you now?" she asked. Victor looked at her, then pushed the door open. "I think if they knew the truth of you, they'd never forget. That night, they ate the stew she made from the rabbits. She'd added wild onions she'd found near the creek and used salt from his stores with a careful hand." Victor tasted it and looked over the rim of his bowl. "You cook like someone who's had to stretch a meal." "I have," she said. "But I never had anyone to share it with before." The fire crackled low as the light faded. Silas stretched her legs under the table, bare feet brushing his. She didn't pull away. "I keep thinking about building something," she said softly. "A life, I mean. Something that's mine. Not handed down or forced on me." Victor set his bowl aside. "You can." "How do you know?" "Because you already started." She looked at him, eyes searching. He didn't flinch. "You came here. You stayed. You're still here." She leaned forward then, hands on the edge of the table. "And what about you? What are you building?" He met her gaze. "Something worth keeping." She reached across the table and touched his fingers. He turned his hand, laced hers with his. The silence that settled over them wasn't empty. It held promise. Outside, the night deepened, stars spreading wide over the Wyoming sky. Inside, warmth lingered on the hearth, in their joined hands and in the spaces between words not yet spoken. The first snowfall came early that year, brushing the ridgelines with white while the valley still held to the last of its gold. Victor stood at the woodpile, splitting logs beneath a low gray sky. Each swing landed clean, his breath clouding in the cold air. Behind him, the scent of simmering broth drifted from the cabin's open door. Silas leaned against the frame, arms crossed over Victor's old wool coat. "You've got enough wood there to outlast the winter twice over." Victor wiped the handle clean. "Snows come early before. Better to be ready." She stepped out, tugging the coat tight at the neck. "I've been thinking about digging a root cellar. The slope behind the cabin's dry and shaded. Would keep the vegetables from freezing if the snow gets deep." He looked at her for a beat, then gave a small nod. "I'll help you mark it out after supper." She started back inside, then paused. "You don't have to say yes to everything I come up with." "I'm not saying yes to humor you," he said. "I'm saying yes because you think things through." That evening, she lit a lantern and brought a pencil stub and scrap of paper to the table. "If we're going to dig, we should plan it first. I don't want to hit stone 2 feet down and have to start over." Victor sat beside her, watching her sketch. "You always draw like that? With measurements and such?" "I used to sneak my brother's arithmetic books. He was supposed to be the one learning trade skills. I just looked over his shoulder." He traced the edge of the paper. "You ever think about building more than a cellar?" She met his eyes. "Like what?" "A home fit for 2 people, not just one man trying to stay warm." She set the pencil down. "I do now." Before dawn the next day, they walked behind the cabin, boots crunching frost. Silas took a length of twine and marked the outline, pressing stakes into the ground. Victor shifted the soil with a spade. Came up dry and loose, easy digging. By midday, they'd cleared the top layer. She took a break beside the stump where they'd left their tools. Victor handed her half an apple from his coat pocket. "Where'd you get this?" she asked. "Traded for it last week. Thought you might want something fresh." She bit into it, tart and crisp. "You think of things I don't expect," she said, licking juice from her thumb. He watched her a moment. "You've changed since you got here." She looked down at the apple. "So have you." The wind picked up. Leaves danced across the clearing in dry spirals. She tucked her hair beneath her scarf and stood. "You think we can finish it before the ground freezes solid? If we don't waste daylight." They worked until the light faded. When they came inside, her hands were raw from the shovel. Victor brought out a tin of salve and rubbed it gently into her palms. She didn't speak while he worked, but her eyes didn't leave his face. That night, She sat on the floor near the fire, mending one of his shirts. The thread caught awkwardly once, and she shook her head. I never sewed for a man before. Victor looked up from the chair. You don't have to. I want to. The next morning, while they cleared the last of the earth from the cellar pit, a rider crested the ridge. Silas stepped back instinctively. Victor raised a hand, calm but alert. The man dismounted 30 yards out, his coat dusty, his horse winded. I ain't here for trouble, he called. Looking for Victor Callahan. Victor stepped forward. That's me. The man pulled a folded paper from his coat. Marshal out of Rollins sent me. Said to deliver this personal. Victor took it, eyes scanning the page. His jaw tightened. Silas stepped beside him, voice low. What is it? Man named Gentry, Victor said. Wanted for attacking a boarding house girl outside Laramie. He's headed this way. She went still. You think he's coming here? He might not be. But if he is, we'll be ready. She looked at the half-dug cellar, then back at him. You going to go after him? I'm not a lawman anymore, he said. But I won't let a man like that hurt anyone else. She reached for his hand, fingers firm. Then I'll stand with you. He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her. I don't want you to stand beside me because you feel you owe me something. I don't, she said. I stand here because I choose to. That night, he brought a second rifle down from the rafters. She took it without hesitation, checked the chamber, and nodded once. They said nothing more. The wind rose strong through the pines as darkness fell, but inside the cabin, the fire burned steady. 2 rifles leaned against the wall. 2 pairs of boots sat side by side near the door. And at the table, Victor and Silas sat close, their shoulders touching, the silence between them no longer guarded, but full of quiet certainty. The morning after the rider brought news of Gentry, the frost clung stubbornly to the grass, even as sunlight filtered through the bare aspens. Silas stood at the cabin's edge, shoulders squared, watching Victor pack his saddlebags. He moved with careful intent, checking the rifle sights and counting cartridges into his vest pocket. You're not planning to go to Rollins, she said, voice steady. No, he answered, but I'll ride to the pass. There's a way down from the northern ridge. If he's coming, he'll take that route less watched. She glanced at the saddle cinch, then back at his face. If you see him first, what will you do? Victor rested a hand on the saddle horn. If he tries to harm anyone again, I'll stop him. I'm not riding to make a name. Just to make sure he doesn't leave another trail behind him. She nodded once, then adjusted the scarf around her throat. I'll keep the fire going. Mule needs tending. And I'll finish bracing the cellar walls. He paused, studying her face. You sure you'll be all right here? I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Victor stepped close, not touching her yet, but near enough she could feel the warmth rising off his coat. You've got good sense, he said. But if something feels off anything at all, you take the rifle and head for the tree hollow east of here. I showed you the way. I remember, she said. But you'll come back. He didn't answer that. Just leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead, slow and certain. Then he mounted and rode off, leaving the air still behind him. Silas worked through the day. She lined the cellar trench with flat stone Victor had hauled from the creek bend 2 weeks before. Her fingers ached from the cold, but she didn't stop. She kept watch on the hills between tasks, gaze drifting often toward the ridge. That night she sat by the fire and carved notches into a length of wood, one for each day she'd been at the cabin. She didn't count them, just marked them, quiet and deliberate. The wind shifted near midnight. She woke and stepped to the door barefoot, rifle in hand. A fox darted across the clearing, its shadow long in the moonlight. No riders, no noise. Still, she didn't sleep again until dawn pressed pale against the window panes. Victor returned on the 3rd day. She heard his horse before she saw it, hooves slow and even against the frozen ground. She rushed to meet him halfway, heart pounding. He dismounted stiffly, favoring his left leg. You're hurt, she said, arm already around his waist. Came off the horse wrong when I crossed a down tree. Just twisted. She helped him inside and eased him into the chair near the hearth. He winced as he pulled off his boot. Did you see him? Victor shook his head. Found fresh prints, but they kept east. Toward the rail line, not the pass. He's not headed this way. She poured hot water into a basin and knelt to soak a strip of cloth. You tracked him alone? He watched her wring the rag and press it gently to his ankle. I've done worse without company. But not better, she said. He looked down at her. No, not better. That night, she sat on the floor beside him, her head resting against his knee, both of them watching the fire burn low. Outside, the snow began falling soft and slow, covering their tracks, the old fears, the path behind them. You know, she said quietly, I never wanted a house full of things. Just a place where I wasn't afraid to speak. Victor reached down, threading his fingers into her hair. You've got that here. She turned her face up to his. And if I wanted to build more than a cellar? He bent slowly and kissed her, nothing rushed or uncertain. Then he whispered, then we'll build it. And when they slept that night, her hand was in his, steady as the snow outside, and for the first time in either of their lives, nothing waited to be taken away. Victor's ankle healed slow but sure. The bruising faded by the second week, and Silas had already adjusted the chores to keep him off it as much as possible. She took to hauling water herself, her stride steadier than it had been in the early weeks, her breath no longer catching at the weight of it. The root cellar was nearly finished, the stone walls stacked solid, the timber roof ready for soil once the frost softened. She came in from the cold one evening with snow in her lashes and a bundle of wild sage tucked under her arm. Victor looked up from the small table where he was sharpening his knife. You planning to cook with that? She shook her head, pulling off her gloves. I want to sew it into the lining of our coats. My grandmother used to do that. Said it kept the cold from settling in the bones. He set the knife down. You never mentioned her before. I never thought I'd need to remember her. But I do now. Victor leaned back in his chair, watching her gather thread and cloth. You think she'd have liked it here? She'd have liked you, Silas said plainly, cutting the herb into neat sprigs. She always said the best men speak little and build things that last. The quiet that settled between them wasn't heavy, it carried warmth, the kind that builds between two people who no longer fear being seen. Later that night, as the lantern burned low, Victor reached into a drawer he hadn't opened in months and pulled out a folded piece of oilcloth. Inside lay a small tin box, and from it, he took a silver brooch shaped like a feather. I traded for this in Virginia, he said, offering it to her. Didn't know who it was for till now. Silas took it carefully, her fingers brushing his. It's beautiful. I've never owned anything like it. Victor's voice was quiet. You do now. She fastened it to the collar of her coat the next morning without a word. The days grew shorter. There was a rhythm now to their life, chopping wood, tending the mule, cleaning rifles, preserving what little produce they'd gathered before the freeze. Silas had begun saving scraps of fabric from worn shirts and trousers, stitching them into a quilt by the fire. Victor mended a broken hinge on the barn door and fashioned a rack for drying meat above the hearth. They'd stopped measuring time by dates. Instead, they marked it in practical things. How many snares they'd set, how many jars of beans lined the shelf, how long it had been since either of them had woken in the grip of old memories. One evening, while Silas swept the hearth, Victor stood from his chair and walked to the table where her quilt lay in progress. You want to marry me? He said, not asking. She turned, broom still in hand. I do. He reached for her hand. Then let's call it done. They married 2 days later with only the trees for witnesses and the wind carrying their vows between them. Victor carved 2 bands from deer antler, plain and smooth. Silas wore hers on a cord until they could trade for metal in spring. That night, they sat close beside the fire, her head on his shoulder. I never thought I'd have this, she said. Not just a home, but peace. Victor kissed her temple. Peace was always meant for us. We just had to reach it. Through the deep winter, they kept building him with his hands, her with her heart and mind. They planted hope in the form of shelves and patchwork and plans for a second room come thaw. The man gentry never came near them. Word reached through a traveler passing by in March that he'd been caught near Cheyenne. Victor and Silas said nothing about it, just went back to their quiet supper and the sound of the wind outside. By late April, the snow melted to reveal wild violets pushing through the soil. Silas knelt beside them, running her fingertips over the petals. Victor stood behind her, arms folded. "You thinking about a garden?" She nodded. "Something with roots. Something that doesn't mind hard ground." He crouched beside her. "Seems fitting." They planted onions and carrots and late corn, and when the cellar was finally full, they carved their initials in the beam over the door. In June, they built the second room, a space with wide windows and shelves for books. They filled it with quiet mornings and the scent of fresh bread and the soft murmur of voices planning for years they'd finally come to believe in. They never left the ridge. Victor built a cradle the following winter. He carved it from pine and lined it with the quilt Silas had finished by the fire. The child came one morning in May, just as the sun crested the eastern ridge, and all the terror Silas once carried melted under the weight of the small life against her chest. Victor held them both, his hands steady as ever. They named her Lark. And in the years that followed, the cabin grew with them more rooms, a covered porch, a garden that flourished even when the rains came late. Neighbors came from the valley below to trade and visit, and none ever left without remarking on the quiet strength that filled the place. Victor and Silas never spoke much about the past. It lived in the lines of their hands, in the way they reached for one another without needing to ask, in the way they built their life with care and intention. And when Silas walked the creek trail with her daughter years later, she would pause sometimes and place her hand against the bark of a certain pine, remembering the first time she'd stood there lost, bloodied, and alone. Then she would smile, turn to the girl beside her, and say, "This is where it all began." And it had. With pain, yes. But also with shelter. With trust. With two people who chose one another again and again until the choosing became a life. Their love was not loud. It was not easy. But it was whole. And it lasted.